Richard Hawthorne leaned back in his chair, surveying the opulence of his dining room. The soft glow of crystal chandeliers reflected off the polished mahogany table, which was laden with gourmet dishes prepared by the finest catering service in the city. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the air as his elite friends engaged in animated conversation, their voices a blend of joviality and pretense. Richard, a successful entrepreneur, had worked tirelessly to cultivate this image of wealth and success. Yet, as he observed his guests, a nagging discomfort settled in the pit of his stomach. "Richard, you've outdone yourself this time," exclaimed Jonathan, a fellow businessman, as he raised his glass in a toast. "To the man of the hour." "To Richard," the crowd echoed, their voices intertwining in a chorus of approval. Richard smiled politely, but his mind was elsewhere. He caught a glimpse of Maria, his housekeeper, through the large window that overlooked the manicured gardens. She stood outside, her thin frame silhouetted against the fading light, her brow furrowed in concentration. Richard's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than he intended. He noticed her bending down, rummaging through the trash bins that lined the garden. "Excuse me for a moment," Richard said abruptly, rising from his chair. He could feel the curious eyes of his guests following him as he stepped away from the dining room and into the cool evening air. As he approached the bins, a mix of emotions stirred within him. He was troubled by the sight of Maria scavenging for discarded food. She had always been diligent and hard-working, but this behavior seemed out of character. Richard cleared his throat, trying to suppress the unease that bubbled to the surface. "Maria," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. She straightened up quickly, her hands instinctively clutching a half-eaten apple as if it were a prized possession. "Mr. Hawthorne, I was just... What's going on? Why are you looking through the trash?" His voice was firm but laced with concern, and he stepped closer, narrowing the distance between them. Maria's cheeks flushed, and she quickly dropped her gaze, the apple tumbling from her fingers and landing with a soft thud on the grass. "It's nothing really. I thought I saw something I could use," she mumbled, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard studied her, noting the way she avoided his eyes. There was an unease about her demeanor that piqued his curiosity further. "It doesn't look like nothing to me," he pressed, his brow furrowing. "You don't need to do this. I pay you well." "I appreciate that, Mr. Hawthorne, truly," she replied, her tone defensive. "But sometimes things are not as they seem. I promise, it's just a habit of mine." "Habit?" Richard echoed, incredulous. "Rummaging through the trash is a habit?" "Please, just forget you saw this," she said, her voice tinged with desperation. "It's embarrassing." Richard took a step back, his mind racing. He had always regarded Maria as a part of his household, a reliable presence who kept his life organized and running smoothly. Yet, standing before her now, he felt the weight of a truth he had never considered. He had no idea what struggle she might be facing. The thought unsettled him. "Maria," he began, softening his tone, "I wouldn't judge you. If there's something you need—" "No," she interrupted, her eyes flashing with something that resembled fear. "I don't need charity, Mr. Hawthorne. I just need to do my job." Richard opened his mouth to respond, but the words faltered. He sensed a deeper story lurking beneath the surface, one that Maria was reluctant to share. He watched as she bent down to retrieve the apple, her hands trembling slightly. The sight stirred something within him, a mix of compassion and curiosity. As he turned away, Richard felt a knot forming in his stomach. The image of Maria scavenging from the trash lingered in his mind, haunting him long after he rejoined his guests inside. He forced himself to engage in the evening's festivities, toasting to success and laughing at jokes, but a disquieting feeling gnawed at him. Later that night, as the last of his guests departed, Richard found himself wandering through the quiet corridors of his home. The grandeur that once felt like comfort now seemed stifling, a gilded cage separating him from the realities of life outside his walls. He could still see Maria's expression, her embarrassment, her defiance. He made his way to the kitchen, where he found Maria tidying up after the lavish dinner. Her movements were quick and efficient, her back to him, but he could sense the tension in her posture. "Maria," he said softly, and she turned, her eyes widening in surprise. Mr. Hawthorne, I didn't expect you to be up. There was a brief silence before he continued. I wanted to apologize for earlier. I didn't mean to pry. She nodded, but Richard could see the guarded look in her eyes. It's fine. You're the boss. Maria, please, he urged, stepping closer. I'm genuinely concerned. I'd like to understand. If there's something going on, you can tell me. She hesitated, the weight of his sincerity hanging in the air between them. I'm fine, really. I have my job, and that's what's important. Is it? Richard challenged gently. What if there's something more you need? Maria's gaze fell to the floor, and for a moment, Richard thought she might break. I have my family, she murmured. They rely on me. I understand, he said quietly, a sense of urgency building within him. But if there's any way I can help, I want to know. She finally met his gaze, and he saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Hawthorne, but I can't accept help. I have my pride. Richard felt a swell of admiration for her spirit, even as it perplexed him. Pride shouldn't come at the cost of your well-being, Maria. You don't have to go through this alone. She shook her head, a sad smile playing on her lips. Sometimes, it's easier to keep things to myself. After a moment, he sighed, realizing that pushing her further might only reinforce her barriers. Okay, he said finally, stepping back. But just know that my door is always open if you ever want to talk. As he retreated to his room, Richard couldn't shake the sense that he had only scratched the surface of Maria's life. The image of her scavenging for food replayed in his mind, a stark contrast to the indulgence he had just hosted. He felt a growing determination to uncover the truth behind her actions, to understand the woman who had dedicated herself to his household while silently battling her own struggles. The night wore on, and as Richard lay in bed, he found himself restless. The world outside felt distant and unimportant compared to the turmoil brewing in his thoughts. He resolved to dig deeper, to learn more about Maria's life beyond the walls of his mansion. What had led her to this situation? What sacrifices had she made? With that in mind, he drifted off to sleep, the question echoing in his mind. What had he missed in his pursuit of success? And what did it truly mean to live a meaningful life? The answers awaited him just outside his door, in a world he had long kept at arm's length. As Richard Hawthorne stepped out of his luxury sedan, he was immediately struck by the stark contrast between his world and the neighborhood surrounding him. The streets were lined with crumbling buildings, their paint peeling and windows boarded up. A group of children played in the dirt, their laughter echoing against the walls of neglect. Richard hesitated, feeling like an intruder in a place where he had never belonged. Yet, curiosity propelled him forward, determined to understand the reality that Maria faced each day. He walked down the narrow, uneven sidewalk, his polished shoes clashing with the gritty asphalt beneath him. The air was thick with the scent of street food, and the distant sounds of shouting and laughter mixed with the rhythmic clatter of a nearby construction site. Richard noticed a woman carrying a bucket of water, her face etched with fatigue and resilience. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable, before returning to her task. "Excuse me," Richard called, his voice hesitant but firm. The woman paused, turning to face him. "Can you tell me about this neighborhood? I'm looking for someone." "Depends on who you're looking for," she replied, her tone cautious. "Maria," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Maria from the Hawthorne residence." A flicker of recognition crossed her face. Maria. She works hard for her family. Lives just down the block." "Thank you," Richard replied, his heart pounding with the anticipation of learning more about Maria's life. He continued walking, taking in the dilapidated buildings and the distant hum of life that thrived despite the obvious struggles. He soon reached the small, weathered house that Maria called home. It was a far cry from the opulence of his own mansion, with its cracked walls and a small garden that seemed to fight for survival amidst the concrete. Richard hesitated at the gate, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. What would he say? How could he approach her without seeming condescending or intrusive? Just then, he heard the sound of laughter coming from the backyard. He peered through the rickety wooden fence and saw Maria's children playing. A boy and a girl, perhaps 7 and 9, were running around, their faces alight with joy as they chased each other. It was a sight that tugged at Richard's heartstrings, a reminder of innocence in a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving. "Hey, slow down." Maria's voice called from somewhere within the house, laced with warmth and authority. Richard's heart softened at the sound. This was a woman who cared deeply for her children, who fought daily to provide for them in a world that seemed stacked against them. Gathering his courage, Richard knocked on the door. He could hear the children giggling and the sound of Maria shuffling about inside. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing Maria's surprised face. "Mr. Hawthorne?" she said, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Hello, Maria," he replied, forcing a smile that felt foreign on his lips. "I hope I'm not bothering you. I wanted to see how you were doing." She stepped back slightly, as if unsure whether to invite him in. "I'm fine, sir. Just busy with the kids." Richard noticed the slight tremor in her voice, the way her eyes darted around as if searching for an escape. "I understand. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. Is that okay?" After a brief pause, Maria nodded slowly. "Yes, of course. Please come in." Stepping into the small home was like entering a different world. The air was fragrant with the smell of spices and something sweet baking in the oven. Richard felt a sense of warmth wash over him, a stark contrast to the cold luxury of his own home. The living room was modestly furnished, with a worn-out sofa and a small television that flickered in the corner. Family photos adorned the walls, capturing moments of joy and resilience. "Your children are lovely," he said, glancing towards the backyard where he could still hear their laughter. "They seem happy." Maria's face softened, pride evident in her expression. "They are. I do my best for them. They deserve a better life, you know." Richard nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I saw them playing outside. It's nice to see them enjoying themselves." A brief silence settled between them, thick with unspoken truths. Maria shuffled her feet, avoiding his gaze. "I try to keep them entertained, even with everything going on." "Everything?" Richard prompted gently, sensing the deeper layers beneath her words. She hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her apron. "It's just things are tough. I work multiple jobs, and sometimes I struggle to make ends meet. I want them to have everything I didn't." Richard felt a pang of guilt wash over him. He had spent his life chasing wealth and success, often forgetting the simple pleasures that truly mattered. "What do you want for them?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Education," Maria replied, her voice steadying. "I want them to have opportunities, to not have to worry about food or bills. I want them to dream big." Richard's chest tightened at her words. Here was a woman who had sacrificed so much for her children, yet she still exuded hope and determination. "What about you?" he inquired, his voice softer now. "What do you want for yourself?" Maria's eyes flickered with vulnerability, and for a moment, she seemed lost in thought. I just want to be able to give them a better life. I don't think about myself much." Richard felt a surge of admiration for her strength and selflessness. "But you deserve something too, Maria. Your hard work and dedication shouldn't go unnoticed." She shook her head, a small smile breaking through her serious demeanor. "It's not about me, Mr. Hawthorne. It's about them." The conversation weighed heavily on Richard's heart. He had always viewed his wealth as a marker of success, but now he questioned the validity of that belief. He couldn't shake the image of Maria scavenging for food, her dignity intact despite her circumstances. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Maria looked up, surprise evident in her eyes. "Help me? How?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, feeling a sense of urgency growing within him. "But I want to understand. I want to do something that matters." She held his gaze for a moment, searching for sincerity. "You don't have to do anything, Mr. Hawthorne. I appreciate your concern, but I'll manage." "But should you have to?" Richard countered, his heart racing. Should anyone have to struggle so much? Silence enveloped them, heavy and contemplative. Maria's expression softened, and he could see the flicker of hope in her eyes. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way forward that didn't involve mere charity, but a genuine connection between their lives. "Let me come back," he said, his voice steady with determination. "Let me learn more about your world, and maybe we can find a way to make it better together." Maria's lips parted slightly in surprise. "You really want to help?" "I do," Richard replied, feeling the weight of his privilege press down on him. I want to understand your struggles, your hopes. I want to do something meaningful. She studied him for a long moment, and Richard felt as if he were standing on a precipice. The decision she was about to make could change everything. Finally, she nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Okay, but promise me you won't pity us. We don't need that. We need understanding. I promise, he said, a sense of purpose igniting within him. I want to learn. As he left her home, Richard felt a shift within himself, a burgeoning desire to bridge the gap between their worlds. The laughter of Maria's children echoed in his mind, a reminder of the joy that still existed amidst the struggle. He realized that in seeking to help Maria, he was uncovering something far more profound, the essence of humanity, the beauty of connection, and the power of empathy. Richard stood in the kitchen, the air thick with the aromas of simmering vegetables and baked bread. The soft clattering of pots and pans was a familiar sound, yet today it felt charged with an unspoken tension. He had resolved to speak with Maria, to break through the barriers of their employer-employee relationship and delve into the depths of her life. With each passing moment, he could feel the weight of his curiosity pressing down on him. As Maria moved deftly around the kitchen, her hands working quickly, Richard cleared his throat. Maria, he began, his voice slightly hesitant. Can we talk for a moment? She paused, her back still turned to him, and he noticed the tension in her shoulders. Is there something wrong, Mr. Hawthorne? She asked, her tone polite but guarded. No, not at all, he replied, choosing his words carefully. I wanted to check in with you. I've been thinking about what I saw the other day. Her body stiffened slightly, and Richard could sense her discomfort. It was nothing, sir. Just a mistake, she insisted, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard took a step closer, feeling a surge of empathy for the woman he had once viewed merely as a housekeeper. It didn't look like nothing to me, Maria. I saw you going through the trash. I want to understand why. She turned to face him, her expression a mix of surprise and vulnerability. You don't need to concern yourself with my life, Mr. Hawthorne. I'm just doing what I can to make ends meet. But I do care, he insisted, his tone earnest. You work hard for me, and I respect that. I want to know you better, to understand what you're going through. Maria's eyes flickered with uncertainty, and for a moment, Richard thought she might retreat back into her shell. But then she sighed deeply, as if she had been holding her breath for too long. It's not easy, sir. Life hasn't been kind to me. Richard nodded, encouraging her to continue. I'm listening. Taking a deep breath, Maria began to share her story. I lost my husband a few years ago. He was the breadwinner, and when he passed, everything changed. I have 2 children to care for, and the money I make here barely covers our bills. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. Sometimes I have to find food wherever I can. I don't want my kids to go hungry. Richard felt a sharp pang in his chest. He had been so wrapped up in his own world, in his own troubles, that he had never truly considered the struggles faced by those like Maria. I had no idea, he murmured, his mind racing with thoughts of how he could help her. I try to keep it together, Maria continued, her eyes glistening. I don't want them to see me struggle. I want to be strong for them. You are strong, Richard said softly, his admiration for her growing. What you're doing for your children, it's incredible. But you shouldn't have to go through this alone. Maria shook her head, her expression firm. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Hawthorne, but I have my pride. I don't need charity. Richard frowned, sensing the weight of her pride and resolve. This isn't about charity, Maria. It's about support. You deserve to have a stable life, to not worry about where your next meal is coming from. She hesitated, her brow furrowing as she considered his words. What do you suggest? I can't just quit my jobs and expect everything to be fine. What if I offered you a raise? He proposed. It could help ease some of your burdens. Maria's eyes widened in disbelief, and she shook her head vigorously. No, sir. I can't accept that. I work for you because I need to, not because I want handouts. I want to earn my pay. Richard admired her fierce independence, yet it frustrated him to see her reject help so adamantly. You're not asking for a handout, Maria. You're simply accepting support from someone who cares about you and your family. A silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Richard could see the internal struggle in Maria's expression, the battle between her need for assistance and her desire to maintain her dignity. He wanted to reach out, to assure her that accepting help didn't diminish her strength. It showcased her resilience. "Tell me what your children need," he urged gently. "If there's anything I can do to help them, please let me know." Maria sighed, her resolve beginning to crack. "They need clothes, school supplies, sometimes just a little extra food for lunch. But I can manage, I promise." Richard felt a mixture of frustration and admiration. "You shouldn't have to manage on your own. You work hard for me, and I want to give back in any way I can." At that moment, the kitchen felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in on them, both grappling with their roles in society. Richard could see the weight of her responsibilities etched on her face, and it stirred something deep within him. He was seeing Maria not just as a housekeeper, but as a person with dreams, struggles, and an unwavering love for her children. "Maria," he said softly, "please think about it. You are doing an incredible job, but you don't have to shoulder this burden alone. You deserve a life where you don't have to worry about food or clothes or anything else for your children." She looked away, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "You're kind, Mr. Hawthorne, but I can't accept what you're offering, not like this." Richard felt a swell of admiration for her refusal to compromise her dignity, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to do something. "Then let me help you in some other way. I could connect you with resources or programs that could provide assistance." Maria studied him, her expression softening. "You don't have to do this, sir. I appreciate your concern, but I'm managing." The sincerity in her voice struck a chord within him. Richard realized that his intentions, though noble, needed to be approached differently. It wasn't just about offering help. It was about respecting her autonomy and finding a way to support her without undermining her pride. "How about this?" he offered, his tone more casual. "Let's start small. If you ever need anything, just come to me. I'm not just your employer. I want to be your ally." Maria hesitated. "Absolutely," he replied, hoping to convey the depth of his sincerity. "I want to understand your world, to be there for you and your children. You've shown me a reality I've never truly acknowledged, and I want to change that." She nodded slowly, a flicker of hope igniting in her eyes. "All right, I'll think about it." Richard smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. Their conversation had opened a door, a path toward a deeper connection built on mutual respect and understanding. As Maria returned to her tasks, the air felt lighter, charged with the promise of change. Richard knew he had taken a step in the right direction, and though the road ahead would be challenging, he was ready to walk it alongside her. Richard Hawthorne stood in the dim light of the community center, the hum of conversation and laughter seeping through the thin walls. In a corner, he observed a group of volunteers preparing meals for families in need. The scent of simmering stew wafted through the air, mingling with the warmth of camaraderie that filled the room. For Richard, this was not merely an act of charity. It was an awakening. Inspired by Maria's resilience, he had begun to volunteer regularly, determined to grasp the reality that lay beyond his gilded cage. As he chopped vegetables alongside an elderly woman named Edith, Richard felt a sense of fulfillment that had long eluded him. "You have a good heart, dear," Edith remarked, her hands deftly slicing carrots. "Not everyone from your world would think to step down here." Richard nodded, his gaze drifting to the small children playing in the corner. "I've seen too much suffering to ignore it any longer," he said, his voice steady. "I want to help. I need to help." Edith paused and looked at him, her expression softening. "It takes courage to change, young man. Most prefer to stay in their bubble, pretending the world outside doesn't exist." He considered her words, reflecting on the isolation he had once embraced. "For so long, I was blind to the struggles around me. I thought success was all that mattered. But Maria," he trailed off, his thoughts drifting to the housekeeper who had opened his eyes to a world of hardship. "She showed me the truth." Edith smiled knowingly, as if she understood the profound impact Maria had on Richard's perspective. "People like Maria are the backbone of our communities. They may not have much, but their strength is immeasurable." Richard felt a warmth in his chest. He thought of Maria, her fierce spirit, and the way she fought for her children every day. It was an honor to be a part of her life, even if just in a small way. Later that day, as Richard drove back to his lavish home, he found himself replaying the moments he had spent with Maria. Her laughter, her fierce determination, her willingness to sacrifice everything for her children. It all resonated with him in a way he had never anticipated. He parked his car and stepped into his mansion. The stark contrast between his opulent surroundings and the struggles Maria faced hitting him like a cold wave. He found Maria in the kitchen, her hands busily kneading dough. The soft thud of her fists against the countertop filled the room. "Good evening, Maria," he greeted, his tone warm but laced with hesitation. She looked up, a slight smile breaking through her concentration. "Evening, Mr. Hawthorne. You're home early. Thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. "I volunteered at the community center today." Maria paused, her brow furrowing. "Really? I didn't think you'd be interested in that sort of thing." Richard crossed his arms, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his voice. "I didn't either, honestly, but it felt good. I want to make a difference, Maria. I want to understand." Her hands stopped moving, and she faced him fully. "Understand what, exactly?" "Your life," he admitted, his gaze steady. "What you go through every day. I want to help you and your children." Maria's expression hardened for a moment, and Richard could see the walls she had built around herself. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Hawthorne, but I can manage. I don't need pity or charity." "It's not pity," he insisted, taking a step closer. "It's empathy. I want to be a friend, not just your employer." The two stood in silence for a moment, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Finally, Maria sighed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "It's hard for me to accept help. I've always had to rely on myself." "I can understand that," he replied, his voice softer. "But you don't have to do it all alone. You have me now." She looked at him, searching his eyes for sincerity. "Why the sudden change of heart, Richard? You were never like this before." "Because I was blind," he confessed. "I focused on my career, my wealth. But seeing you, learning about your struggles, it opened my eyes to what really matters." Maria nodded slowly, her expression softening. "People like me don't often get kindness from the wealthy. It's refreshing, but I don't want to put you in a position where I become a burden." With a newfound determination, Richard took a step forward. "You could never be a burden to me. I want to help your children with their schoolwork. If you'll let me, I want to be a part of their lives." Her eyes widened in surprise. "You really mean that?" "I do," he replied, his voice earnest. "I want to learn, to grow. And if I can be there for you and your kids, that's a step in the right direction." Maria hesitated, a flicker of vulnerability passing over her face. "It's just, I'm used to doing everything myself. It's hard to let someone in." Richard smiled gently. "Then let's take it slow. I'll help with the kids, and we can figure it out together." As they exchanged words, a sense of warmth enveloped the kitchen, the space filled with a shared understanding that had not existed before. It was a small step, but for both of them, it felt monumental. A few days later, Richard found himself at the local school, sitting across from Maria's children, Sophia and Miguel. The two were bright and eager, but their eyes betrayed a hint of uncertainty. "Thanks for helping us, Mr. Hawthorne," Sophia said, her voice soft. "Please call me Richard," he replied, smiling. "I'm here to help you with your studies." Miguel shifted in his seat, glancing at his sister. "Why do you care about us? You're so different." Richard chuckled lightly, his heart warming at their candidness. "I used to think my world was the only one that mattered. But Maria taught me that everyone has a story, and yours are just as important as mine." Sophia tilted her head, intrigued. "Really? You care about our story?" "Absolutely," he said firmly. "I want to help you succeed, to make sure you have every opportunity to chase your dreams." As they engaged in their studies, Richard felt a sense of fulfillment wash over him. He was no longer just a wealthy businessman. He was becoming a mentor, a friend, and a source of support for these two bright children. Their laughter filled the room, and for the first time in a long while, Richard felt alive. However, not everyone was supportive of Richard's new direction. His friends, accustomed to his affluent lifestyle and superficial relationships, began to notice the changes in him. One evening, at a lavish gathering hosted by one of his old friends, Richard found himself cornered by a group of familiar faces. "Look who's getting his hands dirty now," sneered David, a close friend from college, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Richard, you've really changed, haven't you? Volunteering at a soup kitchen? What's next? Living in a shack with the less fortunate?" Richard felt his cheeks flush, but he stood firm. "I'm just trying to be a better person, David. There's more to life than money and parties." His friends exchanged incredulous glances, laughter bubbling up from the group. "You're serious? This isn't you, man. What happened to the guy who used to flaunt his wealth?" "I grew up," Richard replied, his voice steady. "I realized that true fulfillment comes from helping others, not just climbing the social ladder." "Helping others?" Jill, another friend, interjected with a scoff. "You're just going to be taken advantage of. People like that will use you." Richard's heart raced, but he forced himself to remain calm. "If that's the cost of making a difference, then so be it. I'd rather stand with Maria and her children than with people who don't care about the world outside their bubble." Their laughter faded, replaced by a tense silence. Richard felt a weight lift off his shoulders as he realized how far he had come. He no longer needed their validation. He valued Maria's friendship and the connections he was building with her family far more than the superficial relationships he had once clung to. As the night wore on, Richard found himself feeling lighter, more at peace with the choices he had made. He knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to embrace it, armed with the knowledge that true wealth lay not in status or possessions, but in the bonds forged through empathy and understanding. The evening air was thick with tension as Richard paced his living room, the glow of the chandelier reflecting his unease. He had just settled into a routine of newfound purpose, a rhythm that included volunteering and spending time with Maria and her children. Yet, the tranquility of his world shattered when his phone rang, the sound slicing through the silence like a knife. "Richard!" Maria's voice was frantic, barely holding together. "I need your help. It's about Miguel." "What happened? Is he okay?" Richard's heart raced as he sensed the urgency in her tone. He could already picture her, standing in her small, cluttered apartment, worry etched on her face. No, he's fine." Maria rushed to clarify, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. "But he was bullied at school today. They called him poor, said he doesn't belong there. He's so upset. I don't know what to do." Richard felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The thought of Maria's son, a bright boy with dreams, being tormented sent waves of anger coursing through him. "I'm on my way. I'll meet you there," he said, determination replacing his initial shock. As he drove through the streets, Richard's mind raced. He thought about the systemic injustices that plague children like Miguel. He remembered the laughter of his elite friends, their dismissive comments about the less fortunate, and it made him nauseous. He could no longer ignore the realities that lay beneath the surface of his comfortable life. Arriving at the school, he found Maria waiting outside, her face a mask of worry. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know who else to turn to." "Let's go inside and talk to someone," Richard replied, his voice steady. He could feel her anxiety, but he also felt a surge of resolve. They walked into the school together, Maria's small frame seeming even more fragile next to his tall stature. They were led to the principal's office, a sterile room decorated with motivational posters and filled with the scent of old paper. Richard took a deep breath, trying to channel his rising anger into something constructive. The principal, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression, greeted them with a nod. "Maria, Richard," she said, her tone businesslike. "What brings you here?" Richard wasted no time. "We need to talk about Miguel. He was bullied today, and I want to understand what the school is doing to protect him and other children like him." The principal frowned slightly, her brow furrowing as if considering how to respond. "Bullying is a serious issue, and we do have policies in place. But we can't monitor every interaction between students." "That's not good enough," Richard interjected, his voice rising slightly. "Miguel deserves to feel safe at school. You have a responsibility to ensure that no child is marginalized or made to feel inferior because of their background." Maria looked at Richard, her eyes wide with surprise. She had always seen him as her employer, the man who paid her salary, but now she was witnessing a different side of him, a man willing to stand up for her son. The principal cleared her throat, looking uncomfortable. I understand your concerns, but we can't control what the students say to each other. We encourage open dialogue and empathy among our students. Encouragement isn't enough, Richard insisted, pacing the small office. You need to implement programs that specifically address bullying and educate the children about socioeconomic diversity. Miguel should be celebrated for who he is, not ridiculed. The principal shifted in her chair, and for a moment, Richard thought he could see a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "What do you propose?" she asked, sounding slightly more open to the idea. Richard took a breath, gathering his thoughts. "How about creating a mentorship program where older students help younger ones? Pair them with children from different backgrounds to foster understanding. You could also hold workshops that focus on empathy and respect, addressing the biases that lead to bullying." Maria's heart swelled with gratitude as she listened to Richard. She hadn't expected him to take such a strong stand, to care so deeply about her son's plight. "That's a great idea," she added, her voice soft but firm. "Miguel needs to know he belongs. All children need that." The principal nodded slowly, her expression shifting from defensive to contemplative. "Those are valid points. I'll discuss this with the school board and see if we can initiate some programs. We have to do better for all our students." Richard felt a sense of relief wash over him, but he wasn't finished yet. "I want to help," he said, his voice resolute. "I can reach out to local businesses and community leaders to gain support for these initiatives. Together, we can make a difference." "Thank you, Richard," Maria breathed, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know what I would have done without you." As they left the principal's office, the weight that had rested on Maria's shoulders began to lift. Richard could see a flicker of hope in her expression, and it filled him with purpose. They walked through the hallways, and he could hear the laughter of children, a stark contrast to the heaviness that had enveloped them moments before. "Do you really think they'll listen?" Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I believe they will," Richard replied confidently. "Change takes time, but it starts with conversations like this. You and Miguel deserve to be heard." As they stepped outside, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the school grounds. Richard felt a newfound connection to the community, a sense of belonging he had never known before. He glanced at Maria, who was watching the children play, her expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Let's make sure this doesn't end here," he said, glancing at her. "We need to keep pushing for change, for Miguel and for all the kids who feel alone." "Yes, let's do it together," Maria replied, her voice gaining strength. "I want to make sure my children never feel ashamed of where they come from." Richard smiled, feeling the weight of their shared mission. He had come to realize that empathy was not just a fleeting emotion, it was a call to action. Together, they would fight for a better future, not just for Maria's family, but for every child who deserved the chance to thrive. As they walked away from the school, arm in arm, Richard felt a sense of purpose that he had never experienced before. The journey ahead would be challenging, but with Maria by his side, he knew they could create a ripple effect of change that would transform lives. And in that moment, he understood the true taste of change, sweet, empowering, and utterly transformative. Richard Hawthorne sat in his luxurious office, the polished mahogany desk reflecting the afternoon sun that streamed through the large windows. He had just returned from the city council meeting, where he had passionately advocated for new educational programs for low-income families. The excitement of his recent endeavors had filled him with a sense of purpose he had never known before. But that thrill was short-lived when he received an unexpected call from his assistant. "Richard, I need to talk to you." "It's urgent," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "What's going on?" he asked, a knot forming in his stomach. "It's about the company. There's been a whistleblower, and the board is convening an emergency meeting. They're saying we're under investigation for unethical business practices." Richard felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. He had worked tirelessly for years to build his reputation, and now it seemed to be crumbling before his eyes. "Who is behind this?" he demanded, his voice rising. "I don't know all the details yet, but it looks like some of your friends have been feeding information to the media. They're trying to discredit you," she replied. An icy realization washed over him. Those very friends, who had mocked his newfound empathy and commitment to helping others, were the ones orchestrating his downfall. The betrayal stung sharply, But Richard was no longer the man who would cower in the face of adversity. He had found his voice through Maria, and he was determined not to let fear dictate his actions. He immediately called a meeting with the board. The conference room was tense as he entered, all eyes on him. Whispers filled the air, and the atmosphere was charged with anxiety. He took a deep breath, projecting confidence as he stepped to the head of the table. "I know why we're here," he started, glancing at several familiar faces that were now laced with deceit. "I've been made aware of an investigation into our business practices, and I want to address it head-on." The chairman, a man Richard had once considered a mentor, leaned forward. "Richard, you need to listen to reason. There are serious allegations against you. We need to handle this delicately." "Delicately? You mean sweep it under the rug?" Richard's voice grew firm. "I will not allow my name to be associated with corruption. This company was built on integrity, and I refuse to let it be tarnished by those who are attempting to sabotage me." The room fell silent as he continued. "I know who has been leaking information. Friends who have turned their backs on me because I chose to take a stand for what is right. I will not hide from this. I will face it, and I will expose the truth." Richard's heart raced as he spoke. He felt empowered, fueled by the lessons he had learned from Maria. He was no longer just a businessman. He was a man of principle, willing to fight for integrity. "I propose we hold a press conference," he declared. "I will address the public, and we will come clean about our practices. If there's been wrongdoing, it will come to light, and we will take responsibility." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the boardroom, and the chairman's face turned a shade of crimson. "You're putting everything at risk, Richard. This could ruin you, or it could rebuild me," Richard countered, resolute. "I refuse to let fear dictate my actions. I've seen the impact of corruption firsthand, and I will not be a part of it. I owe it to the people who believe in me, especially to Maria and her children, to stand up against this." With that, Richard laid out his plan. He would gather evidence, confront the board, and ensure that those who had betrayed him faced the consequences of their actions. The meeting ended with a palpable tension, and Richard felt lighter as he left. He had made his choice, and now it was time to follow through. In the days that followed, Richard worked tirelessly. He collected documents, reached out to contacts, and built a case that would expose the wrongdoing within his company. Along the way, he kept Maria informed, inviting her to be part of this journey. She was hesitant at first, not wanting to draw attention to herself or put Richard at risk. But he insisted. "Maria, you deserve to be heard. Your story matters, and it will show the world what we are fighting for," he said, looking into her eyes with sincerity. Finally, the day of the press conference arrived. Richard stood before a sea of reporters, cameras flashing as he adjusted the microphone. His heart raced, but he focused on the faces in the crowd, remembering the struggles of families like Maria's. "Thank you for being here today," he began, taking a deep breath. "I stand before you not just as a businessman, but as a human being who values integrity and honesty. Recently, serious allegations have surfaced regarding my company's practices. I want to assure you that I take these matters seriously." He detailed the investigation, openly addressing the challenges he faced, and named names of those who had betrayed him. "I refuse to allow corruption to thrive. I am committed to transparency and will not allow fear to dictate my actions. I am here to take responsibility for my company's practices, and I pledge to rectify any wrongdoing." The room was silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "Moreover, I want to announce the establishment of a foundation dedicated to supporting families in need, like those in Maria's community. It's time to put our resources to work for the greater good." As he finished, the applause echoed through the room, and Richard felt a surge of relief. He had taken a stand, and the truth was finally out. The reporters bombarded him with questions, but he felt ready to face them. He had fought for what was right, and it felt liberating. In the aftermath, Richard's reputation began to mend. The board, once filled with doubt, found their confidence in him renewed. The investigation revealed the corruption he had exposed, and those responsible faced consequences. Richard's commitment to integrity had transformed not just his life, but also the culture of his company. Months later, Richard stood beside Maria at the grand opening of the foundation, a testament to their shared journey. The venue was filled with supporters, community members, and families ready to embrace the change they had fought for. As Maria smiled at him, he couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. "I couldn't have done this without you, Maria," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. She shook her head, her eyes shining. "You did this, Richard. You found your path. And you showed me the way," he replied, a warmth spreading through his chest. This was more than just a new beginning for him. It was a new life for many families who would benefit from their efforts. As the evening unfolded, Richard felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He had learned the importance of empathy and integrity, and with each passing moment, he realized that a simple act of kindness had transformed not only his life but the lives of so many others. Together, they stood as a beacon of hope, ready to change the world, one life at a time.